I know my favorite tree better than I know my best friend. And that sounds insane, but it is completely and utterly true. I spent more than half of my life staring up at that tree. It sits in the very corner of my backyard, connecting the forest to my neighborhood. In my childhood, I would study its leaves and its branches, embarrassingly, but honestly, more than I would study in school. And I was a fun-sized kid, so the idea of seeing the world at a different altitude really intrigued me. And at a certain point, I mustered up the courage to climb and climb and climb until on one end of the tree, it seemed as though I could see the entire forest. And on the other end of the tree, it seemed as though I could see my entire neighborhood. Through my line of sight, I was connected to all of these houses, gardens, fences, trees, bushes, while at the same time being so far away from them. Recently in my adolescence, my love for that altitude and for observation never really let up. So I returned to that tree and its branches, climbed and climbed and climbed once again, but something was different. Every so often I would stop, sit in a particular branch, and I would fish out a pen and paper or a small book from my pocket. And I would write and read some of my favorite stories there. For me, it was yet another way to be connected to, engulfed in, and a part of a world that was so there and so close, but at the same time at a distance. Back to my childhood, my observational explorations didn't only happen from up above, they also happened on the ground, most commonly in fields and in gardens. I remember when I was a kid, I saw this study that said if you sing to plants, they'll grow better and faster and stronger. And I cannot tell you about the efficacy of that particular study, but I can say that I did it. And soon the singing turned into talking, and I was talking to the kale in my garden, to the bunnies that would speak into the gate, and to trees and bushes and everything in between. And I also can't say if I really believed they could hear me or not, but whether in vain or in reality, in my attempts to communicate with them, I wondered how and why plants specifically might communicate with each other. And most importantly, I wondered if my favorite tree had a voice of its own. To understand my questions and the conclusions that I came to, I think you must first understand where I came from and the little pieces of my identity that fashioned together to form my questions. In this context, I think that my identity comes in two parts. The first being the fact that I'm a writer. My entire career revolves around the transfer of information, ideology, emotion, feeling on a screen or on a stage, or most traditionally in the pages of a book. I believe that writers have the power to share and to transfer the feeling of the meaning of anything and everything without ever knowing exactly who they shared that feeling with. Writers can write, and readers can read on some random area on the planet, and they can be experiencing the same wave of emotions. They can come to understand the same idea. And in that, I wondered if, in one way or another, plants might be able to do more of the same. The second part of my identity that came together to form my questions is that I'm Gen Z, a part of the generation that was raised by the internet. For context, I'm 17 years old. I'm supposed to be starting my senior year of high school right now, but instead I finished my credits last year at college in quarantine on a phone and computer app called Zoom. It was there my professors transferred information, lectures, homework questions to me without having ever stepped foot in the classroom that year. I spent the majority of my time with a group of students that I had never met before. And it was in that evolutionary communication through technology, that is in its nature transactional and distant, that I wondered if in one way or another, if our journeys of communication were parallel to that of a tree or a forest. I think that technology is really central to the conversation, specifically the internet. It was on the internet that I first saw my now favorite ecologist, Suzanne Simard, and her theories of forest ecology. Her most famous one, essentially, is this. She examined the life and function of subterranean mycorrhizal mycelial networks of fungi and their mutualistic symbiosis with virtually every botanical organism on the planet, and thus she examined how imperative they are to the life and function of virtually every botanical biome on Earth. In other words that are English, like the internet and its underground wires that travel beneath the surface, connecting our devices to each other through the internet and its spaces, nature kind of has its own little communicator. Mycorrhizal fungi. It spans underneath the surface in sort of root-like formation, and it connects to the root of different plants, serving as a middle ground to transfer information, warning, nutrients, sugars from plant to plant. To circle back, like a writer can transfer information, ideology, emotion from pen to paper to person. A tree can transfer information, warning, nutrients from tree to fungi to tree. And much like the internet, these mycorrhizal networks of fungi are not always used for good. Last year, I conducted a study of over 100 people on the internet. And even though all of these people said that they were active on the online space, specifically the online space of social media, and that they had learned from social media, an overwhelming majority of them said that their mental health had been detrimentally or negatively affected by that space and people within it. Similarly, when resources are scarce or just in personal interests, trees or other plants will exploit their relationship with the mycorrhizal network to get the upper hand. And that will result in a detrimental effect to the health of another plant or tree. Now, let me make this abundantly and utterly clear. All of this is by no means an amazing new discovery by me, some random ecology and botany nerd obsessed with the findings of their favorite ecologist. The mycorrhizal network of fungi is already nicknamed the Wood Wide Web after the World Wide Web for a reason. We have already made known and found out the similarities that nature has the privilege of having to us. But I think that the way we look at it has the possibility of being more modestly philosophical. I mean, think of the way that we see the internet and technology, this amazing human creation powered by our monster of Frankenstein, artificial intelligence. The internet is either, and technology itself is either the end or the beginning of the world as we know it. It's either destroying our minds and crumbling our societies, or it's the key to our Darwinistic domination, the key to the future as it should be. But I think that my generation especially sees it a bit differently. We grew up with phones in our hands and Facebook at our fingertips. Communication through technology itself is just not that astonishing to us. We kind of just come to understand that at one point or another back in history, we just went from talking to letters to phone calls, emails, texts to DMs, and it wasn't the end or the beginning of the world. It was just the next way of doing it. And in our minds, it didn't center us as humans and our brilliance. It just was us at one moment or another. And that's not to say that the internet and that communication through technology can't be horridly destructive or amazingly constructive to an individual person or a space, but much in the same way that fungi can be horridly destructive or amazingly constructive to an individual tree or space of the forest. And with all of that, it begs the question that if in our journeys of communication, ours is ever so parallel to that of a forest, why do we still regard ours as so unnatural? And why do we bash or praise ourselves for evolving? And I think that maybe in some broad philosophical sense, there might be some sort of a benefit to taking ourselves a little less seriously. That's not to say that we should stop trying to better ourselves and the planet. In fact, I think that we should start using everything we have to help each other and to help the world around us. But that's not the conversation we're having right now. I want to ask the question, and I want you to ask yourselves and each other the question: what would happen if we uncentered ourselves in our theories of everything? If we looked at the world from many meters up as a part of it, reaching out to connect and to communicate, not because of our Darwinistic domination or because there's something to lose or to gain, but because in some childlike sense, it's who we are. And in that moment, it's what we do. Thank you.